What do you know? Visit your priceless museum. Without you, we'll just go on. As we stood in the beautiful main plaza of Abidos, my son's comments took my breath away from me like a physical blow. The cobblestone alleys and whitewashed walls of the old Portuguese village suddenly seemed more menacing and foreign than lovely. You can't be serious, Nathan, I said, looking for any indication that this was a badly thought-out prank on my son's face. This is a foreign nation. I'm not fluent in Portuguese. Our next hotel's name is unknown to me. You've been whining the whole trip, Mom, he said, avoiding eye contact. Nothing we do is sufficient. The hotels are too up-to-date. The timetable is hurried. The true Portugal is not being shown to us. I said in a quieter voice than I meant to, I just suggested we might visit this small museum I read about. No more than an hour would be needed. My daughter-in-law, Elise, said, we don't have an hour. Standing next to our rental car, she was purposefully uninterestedly browsing through her phone while sporting designer sunglasses on her flawless nose. I told you about the restaurant on the coast with 10,000 Instagram tags, and we have reservations there. If we don't depart right away, our slot will be missed. I mumbled, God forbid we miss a photo opportunity, and instantly regretted my remark after saw Nathan's visage stiffen. Mom, I'm talking about just that. Elise has spent weeks organizing this itinerary, and you have only offered criticism in response to her persistent passive-aggressive comments. It hurt like a slap to hear how harsh his statement was. I had been quite appreciative of the opportunity to travel to Europe with them. A goal I'd put off for decades, raising Nathan by himself after his father abandoned him, working 2 jobs to pay for college, and helping him launch his profession by watching his kids when needed. I had concentrated on being helpful, unobtrusive, and grateful even after my second husband, David, died 3 years ago. However, there is something fresh and different about me that rejects this description. That's not true, and you know it, I answered, straightening my posture despite my advanced age of 67. At every stage of this journey, I have been accommodating. Even if it meant hurrying through locations I've been waiting my entire life to visit, I've complied with Elisa's schedule without protesting in order to provide her the ideal lighting for her social media pictures. With the same expression of a defiant teenager, Nathan's jaw tightened. Mom, whatever. We're heading out. Do you wish to view your priceless, genuine Portugal? This is your opportunity. He turned and moved in the direction of the vehicle. Unable to comprehend what was occurring, I stood motionless. He wouldn't really abandon me here, would he? Nathan? My voice faltered. This isn't amusing. Without replying, he got into the driver's seat. A tiny, contented smile played at the corners of Elisa's mouth as she lingered for a bit longer. Don't worry, she added very sweetly, Judith. You can definitely find your way to Lisbon. Perhaps speak with a local. She made an ambiguous gesture at an old Portuguese woman at a neighboring kiosk selling handmade lace. Oh, hold on. Do you not speak the language? You'll work something out, I'm sure. I stared in shock as they shut the doors after she climbed into the passenger seat. The engine fired up. This must have been a mere fear tactic. They wouldn't really take off in their cars? Elisa's voice came to me through the open window, and she didn't even try to turn down the volume. We'll see how it turns out. We'll see how she recovers. As the automobile moved away from the curb, Nathan's chuckle echoed hers. As they drove down the short street and vanished around a bend, I stood in startled silence. I was momentarily unable to breathe, move, or think. This was not possible. I couldn't have been left alone in a foreign place where I didn't know anyone or understand the language by my own son. I didn't know how we were going to get to our next stop. However, he had. I was filled with panic. My knees buckled under a rush of dizzying anxiety. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat, so I gripped the edge of a nearby stone seat to stabilize myself. I muttered to myself, "Oh, God. God, God, God." A brief assessment of my circumstances just made me more terrified. My passport, credit card, pocketbook, and roughly €200 in cash were all with me, Although I had my phone with me, I had spent the entire trip on Nathan's international data plan. My phone was worthless for seeking accommodations, translating, or using navigation without Wi-Fi. Not even my suitcase was with me. It was in the rental car's trunk, along with the majority of my clothes, prescription drugs, and personal hygiene products. Black spots danced at the edges of my vision as I slid onto the bench and tried to regulate my breathing. I fiercely told myself, don't faint. Don't exacerbate the situation. Ignorant of my sorrow, a group of visitors walked past, laughing and taking pictures. The square went about its daily business as usual. Customers conversing with store owners, a street performer in a corner strumming a guitar. Kids running across the cobbles after birds. The scene's banality stood in stark contrast to the crisis that was gripping me. Now what should I do? The question kept coming back to me, overpowering and without a response. With shaking hands, I took out my phone in the vain hope that I may be able to connect to some public Wi-Fi. No data, no service, and no link to the outside world were displayed on the screen. My phone needed a data connection to make international calls, but I was still able to call Nathan. Just before they drove out of range, a text message appeared on my screen. "We'll tell you how to get to Lisbon once you're done being a pain in the ass." I was moved to tears by its nonchalant cruelty. I wasn't being challenging. Instead of hurrying to another Instagram-worthy spot, I, a 67-year-old woman, had just wanted to visit a museum. And for that, I had been left alone in an unfamiliar town with no way to get assistance. Through my dread, I gazed around the plaza and saw it for the first time. The sun was still warm and high in the middle of the afternoon. It was a little town. I think I could walk all of it in under an hour. There must be a police station, a hotel, and an English-speaking person, right? I made myself stand up, take a deep breath, and try to reason my way out of my terror. Finding someone who could assist me, someone who could speak English, like a tour guide or hotel concierge, was the first step. A tiny notice in a cafe window caught my attention as I plucked up the guts to approach one of the store owners. Free Wi-Fi. A lifeline. I could look into lodging possibilities, transit options, and possibly even reserve a taxi to take me to Lisbon if I could access the internet. I pushed the door open with more force than was necessary as I went unsteadily to the cafe. After the intense sunlight, the room was chilly and dim, with the aroma of pastries and coffee filling the air. Tourists and locals sat around a few tables, most of them absorbed in quiet conversation or gazing at their phones. "Passo a ajudar?" I was greeted with a smile by the young man behind the counter. "I apologize, but I don't speak Portuguese." Stress thinned my voice as I spoke. "Are you fluent in English?" His smile wavered a bit. "Little English," he remarked. "Wi-Fi?" I gestured toward the window's placard. "Password?" He brightened, comprehending. SIM. He indicated that the Wi-Fi name and password were written on a chalkboard behind the bar. I said, "Thank you," feeling a wave of relief at this minor triumph. "And, please, coffee? Café?" "Yes," he said. "Espresso?" I agreed, content to sit and utilize the Wi-Fi regardless of the type of coffee he delivered. I located a tiny table in the corner and struggled to input the password on my phone while my hands were still shaking. "Work, please. Work, please." I pleaded in silence. The wireless network established a connection. One more minor triumph. Tears threatened to well up again, but this time they were tears of relief rather than terror. My espresso arrived from the barista in a small, black cup made of white porcelain. With what I hoped was a typical smile, I thanked him. I didn't want to show him how upset I was. What comes next? Although I was connected to the outside world, what was my strategy? Make a call to Nathan and ask him to return for me. Attempting to navigate Lisbon on my own? Search for a place to stay the night here in Abidos? Every alternative appeared impractical in its own way. It was nearly intolerable to think of the embarrassment of phoning Nathan after he had so willfully deserted me. In my current mindset, it seemed difficult to figure out how to get to Lisbon, a city I had never been to and which was more than 80 kilometers away. And remaining here required me to acknowledge that I was really alone and that my kid had really abandoned me with no plans to come back anytime soon. The espresso matched my thoughts in bitterness as I sipped it. I had learned a lot about independence from my 3 years as a widow, but nothing had prepared me for this kind of desertion. David would never have permitted it. Nathan's actions would have infuriated David, but David wasn't present. There was nobody present. It was just me, a woman who had dedicated her life to caring for others, suddenly compelled to care for herself under the most trying conditions. The espresso helped to steady me a little, its caffeine piercing the terror. As I should have done at the start of the trip, I launched my Maps app and downloaded the offline map of Portugal. Using my browser, I looked up hotels and abitos. There were a variety, from opulent pousadas to affordable guest houses. A notification showed up on my screen as I was navigating through the options. Nathan texted. "Don't be so dumb, Mom. To get to Lisbon, simply take a taxi. When you arrive, we'll cover the cost." Something new was sparked inside me by the contemptuous tone. Anger, not panic or fear. Anger that is clear and unadulterated. As I thought about my answer, my fingers lingered over the keyboard. "I'm safe," I typed after a moment. "Don't be concerned about me. Enjoy your dinner on Instagram." After that, I put my phone down, shut off Nathan's and Elisa's notifications, and drank more espresso. Now the bitter liquid had a new flavor. Like determination, like if it were the first choice I had made for myself in a long time. I wouldn't be in a hurry to get to Lisbon today. I wouldn't be pleading with my kid to save me from a predicament he had purposefully put me in. I would work this out myself. I said to myself, going over the possibilities once more, first accommodation, then meal, and finally, we'll see. I was further steadied by the simple act of planning and taking charge of my circumstances rather than giving in to terror. Even though I was still alone in a foreign country, scared, and hurt, these circumstances no longer held me back. I was 67-year-old Judith Palmer, widower, destitute, but unbroken. Not quite yet. As I bent over my phone, grimly determined to look up lodging possibilities, the cafe owner eyed me with growing concern. He came to my table after I had ordered my third espresso, which he had done by pointing and grinning. "Issue?" He pointed to my phone and my obviously upset mood as he asked in poor English. With a wave of humiliation, I paused. How was I supposed to explain that my own son had left me in a foreign town because he wanted to see a museum? The anxiety was nearly as great as the humiliation. But pride had no place in survival, and I needed support. "My family," I started, looking for easy words. "They drove off." I pretended to drive off. "For tonight, I require lodging." His eyes became wide with shock. "Sozinha? Familia disse você?" In amazement, he reverted to Portuguese, but then he caught himself. "Sozinha? Familia disse você?" I fought back the tears that threatened to fall as I nodded. In a way that being by myself with my panic had not, saying it aloud made it real. The look on the young man's face changed from bewilderment to outrage. "Nay," he responded firmly. "Not a good family." He gestured toward himself. "I can help, Miguel." I felt a wave of relief at this simple act of kindness. "Judith." I touched my chest in response. "Thank you." Miguel took out his phone and made a brief conversation in a fast-paced Portuguese that I was unable to understand. We spoke for a moment, and then he smiled back at me. "My tia. Aunt. She owns a guest house. There is a tiny room available. It's inexpensive, safe, and clean." He pulled up a picture of a slender building with flower boxes and blue shutters on his phone. "The hotel is decent yet not very pricey." I said honestly, "That looks perfect." "To what extent?" Miguel gestured to the other side of the square. "There. 3 minutes." Another relief was the closeness. I wasn't convinced I could navigate to a far-off place in my current condition. Miguel said, looking at the almost deserted cafe, I take you. João may observe the café. Just 5 minutes. He shouted to an elderly man seated at the counter, who was probably João, before I could object. He nodded and stepped behind the bar. Miguel motioned for me to come along. The afternoon light was beginning to set outside, causing the cobblestones to produce darker shadows. Many of the buildings were whitewashed, and the air was pleasant and fragrant with flowers from the planters. It would have been charming to me in a different situation. Miguel shortened his stride to keep up with my slower pace as we passed the square. Walking still required conscious effort because of the jittery feeling my legs were experiencing from the adrenaline and coffee. American? As we walked, Miguel inquired. Yes, I did confirm. From Boston. He smiled. Ah, Boston. The Celtics. The Red Sox. In spite of everything, his joy made me smile. Indeed, precisely. Why does family abandon you? I was surprised at how direct his inquiry was. I let out a sigh. How can the intricate dynamics that had brought us to this point be explained? I disagree. I said plainly. They were upset. They departed. Miguel gave a disapproving shake of his head. Bad. Old mother shouldn't be abandoned by family. At the first sight of his own words, he looked horrified. Apologies? Not too old? Not too old? His embarrassment could have been humorous under other situations. I told him it was all right. I'm getting old. You're correct, too. No one's family should abandon them. We reached a slender structure that resembled the picture he had shown me. Beside the door was a hand-painted sign that said Casa de Maria. When Miguel knocked, a woman in her early 60s with salt and pepper hair pulled back in a handy bun opened the door. She had on a white apron and a plain blue dress. Her eyes were as warm as Miguel's. Miguel said, Tia Maria. Judith from Boston is here. Presumably to clarify his predicament, he said something in Portuguese. As Miguel talked, Maria's look changed from one of courteous inquiry to one of indignation. She answered quickly in Portuguese, making strong hand gestures. Familia was said to me multiple times, each time accompanied by a disapproving shake of her head. Miguel interpreted. My aunt said, welcome, greatly modifying what had obviously been a much longer rant. Her room costs €60 and includes breakfast. It exceeded the amount I had budgeted for this trip's lodging costs for a single night. It felt incredible to have found anything at all, though, considering my situation. With gratitude, I reached for my wallet and remarked, that's perfect. Many thanks to you both. Miguel waved my gratitude away. Now I returned to the cafe. Tia will assist you. He smiled and gestured to Maria. She is more fluent in English than I am. Maria led me to a tiny room on the second floor after he departed. With a wrought iron bed, white sheets, and a window looking out onto a little courtyard with potted lemon trees, it was modest but spotless. With a shower, toilet, and pedestal sink, the bathroom was small but immaculate. Is it good? Maria inquired, cautiously observing my expression. It's beautiful, I told her. Excellent. Satisfied, she nodded. Are you hungry? Are you thirsty? I realized I hadn't eaten since breakfast when I was asked the question. Hunger had been the least of my worries among all the chaos and anxiety. But my stomach felt empty now that she had brought it up. Actually, yes. Is there a restaurant close where I could have dinner? Maria gestured dismissively. I prepare the meal. Good, yet simple. Now you rest. 7 o'clock for dinner. She gestured toward a tiny desk in the corner that held an electric kettle along with some packets of instant coffee and tea bags. Coffee or tea? Assist yourself. She went, quietly shutting the door behind her, before I could argue that she didn't have to feed me. The events of the day crashed over me like a tsunami as I collapsed into the bed alone in the quiet room. I was abandoned in a faraway nation by my own son. I was in a town I had never intended to stay in the house of a stranger. I only had my clothing and whatever was in my pocketbook. I didn't have any luggage. I was abruptly struck by how ridiculous the situation was, and I was surprised when I started laughing. A little hysterical, but still funny. I would have always been the one with backup plans, the one who carried extra band-aids and rain ponchos on field trips, the one who had backup lectures ready in case the projector failed, if my kids could see their correctly organized history teacher now. I was now totally lost and reliant on the generosity of people. After kicking off my shoes, I reclined on the bed and gazed up at the ceiling. I felt a wave of exhaustion, the adrenaline that had kept me going finally fading. My eyelids were heavy, and within minutes, sleep had taken me in spite of the strange environment and the day's tragedy. Maria's voice called out to me as I woke up, "Dinner ready?" Sonora Palmer. I sat up fast, momentarily bewildered by the strange setting. Then reality struck again. Miguel, Maria's guest house, Nathan, and the abandonment. I called, my voice raspy from sleep, coming. In order to smooth my silver-streaked hair and splash water on my face, I rushed to the tiny restroom. The reflection in the mirror was a pale, drawn face with heavy circles under the eyes. I fixed my rumpled clothes as best I could and squeezed my cheeks to restore some color. Maria had arranged a little table in the courtyard downstairs, complete with a bowl of olives, a carafe of red wine, and a checkered cloth. She said that it would be better to study my face after sleep because the lemon trees were hung with tiny white lights that created a soft glow in the encroaching dusk. I argued it was far better to manage a real grin. I'm grateful for everything. It's really nice. My gratitude was waved aside by her. Not nice. Typical. Human. She motioned me to take a seat. Now eat. We plan for tomorrow. Tomorrow. Between us, the word lingered. I had no idea what the future held, what choices I would make, or what course I would take. For the time being, though, there was this moment, this straightforward dinner in a lovely courtyard. This unexpected act of generosity from a complete stranger, this first minor triumph of self-sufficiency. Maria poured me some wine, and I took a drink, its deep flavor bringing me back to the here and now. I'd made it through the first day alone, whatever came next. Even though it was only a minor achievement, it felt enormous at the time. I awoke the following morning to the distant ring of church bells and sunlight pouring through the blue shutters. I lived in the transitional state between sleep and wakefulness for a lovely time, unburdened by stress or recollection. Then reality returned with a rush. My desertion, Nathan's treachery, and the uncertain future. I had a dozen text messages and 7 missed calls from Nathan on my phone. Observing the evolution from irritated, "Mom, this is absurd," I moved through them without opening any. "Give me a call." "Too worried, how are you? Where are you lodging?" "Mom, please answer," to what seemed to be real concern. "We're becoming quite worried." He was too late to be concerned. I couldn't get the picture of him and Elise laughing as they drove off. It was an intentional act of cruelty rather than a brief moment of poor judgment. Without answering, I put the phone down and walked to the tiny restroom. My reflection appeared slightly better than it had the day before. My cheeks had some color again, but the lines of stress around my eyes were deeper. I grimaced at my wrinkled clothes as I brushed my teeth and cleansed my face with the travel-sized toothpaste I had in my bag. I would have to figure out how to get some necessities today. Maria was downstairs arranging a little breakfast table in the garden. As I walked up to her, she smiled warmly. "Bon dia. Do you get enough sleep?" "Thank you, very well," I said, moving to the seat she pointed to. "I am so grateful for your generosity yesterday." She poured black, delicious coffee into a small cup and waved away my thanks. "What are your plans for today, then?" The straightforward inquiry surprised me. Yesterday, I had been so preoccupied with getting by that I hadn't given much attention to finding a safe spot to sleep. "I'm not sure," I confessed. "I have some clothes and toiletries to buy. My son's automobile had my baggage." Maria gave a contemplative nod. "There aren't many tourist stores in Abydos, but everything is within 15 minutes bus ride from Caldas de Reina. Pharmacies and department stores. She looked at my face. But you have to make a decision first. You either stay in Lisbon or travel there to find your son. Between us, the question lingered. It was an obvious logical decision. Visit Lisbon. Get back together with Nathan. Despite the stress, complete the planned trip, get back to Boston on time, and go back to my quiet existence of lonesome dinners and sometimes babysitting. However, a part of me objected to this reasonable course. My stomach tightened at the thought of Elisa's smug enjoyment at my situation and Nathan's heartless laughing as they drove away. Finally, I answered, I don't know. I must think. Maria nodded, her face devoid of criticism. As you eat, reflect. Local cheese, fresh bread, and eggs from my sister's hens. The coffee was strong and invigorating, and the modest meal was great. My mind began to clear as I ate. A seething rage and, more unexpectedly, a tentative sense of possibility had replaced the panic of yesterday. What would happen if I didn't visit Lisbon? What if I set out on my own path rather than following my ungrateful son? It was an exciting and terrible thought. I had some cash, my credit card, and my passport. I was doing well. Although I couldn't speak Portuguese, I could communicate in rudimentary English. Back home, I had no urgent obligations, no pets to take care of, no plants to water, and no unrescheduled appointments. What I lacked was bravery. Or did I? I had previously escaped abandonment in a faraway land, hadn't I? In this beautiful courtyard, hadn't I found lodging, food, and even a moment of connection? My thoughts were interrupted when Maria mentioned that there was a bus to Caldas at 10:30. I can show you where to buy stuff if you want to. I looked at my watch. 9:15. Thank you, that would be much beneficial. What about your son? Gently, she inquired. Will you give him a call? I let out a sigh as my newfound resolution was weighed down by my parental duty. If nothing else, I should let him know I'm safe. Maria gave a nod of approval. Yes, give him some leeway. Not excessively. Next, choose what you desire. What I want, I repeated to myself. When was the last time I really thought about what I wanted, without regard to the demands or expectations of others? I wrote Nathan a quick text after breakfast. I'm secure. And have secured lodging in Abitus. Pondering the next course of action. We'll communicate. He responded right away. God be praised. We were going to give the embassy a call. Where are you lodging? We'll be there to pick you up immediately. Don't apologize. No recognition of their actions. The mere notion that I would re-enter the line, appreciative of their saving. No need, I typed in response. Right here, I'm doing great. After a brief pause, I continued, what you did was dangerous and cruel. I require some time. Unwilling to allow his response to affect my subsequent choices, I ended the call before seeing his response. To help me find my way back, Maria pointed out landmarks as she led me to the bus stop. She clarified that the bus returns every hour until 8 p.m. In front of the market is the final destination. It's impossible to miss. When the bus arrived, it was almost empty. Only a couple of young backpacking travelers who seemed like they were from Australia or New Zealand, plus a few old locals. I was happy that I didn't need to speak Portuguese for this straightforward transaction, so I gave the driver cash. I leaned my face against the cool windowpane as the bus twisted through the Portuguese countryside, taking in the passing vineyards and olive fields. I felt a sense of calm descend upon me for the first time since Nathan had left. Not precisely happy, but an odd sense of lightness, the lack of responsibilities, the need for justifications, and the willingness to put other people's desires ahead of my own. Caldas de Reina proved to be a quaint little city with businesses lining the main streets and a thriving central market. I found a department store and bought a little bag to carry them in, 2 changes of clothes, and underwear. I got some basic cosmetics and travel-sized necessities in a pharmacy. I was able to complete the transactions with very minimum verbal communication, such as nodding, smiling, and pointing. I switched my phone back on and checked the time while enjoying a sandwich and sparkling water at a cafe. Nathan had sent a flurry of texts ranging from angry to worried and had called 4 more times. "This isn't funny, Mom. We have made touch with the Abidas Hotel. You have not been seen by them. Are you attempting to discipline us? Since it's functioning. Elise is not happy. You're destroying the trip," she says. I laughed aloud at the last one. Elise was upset, attracting inquisitive looks from tables around. Elise was furious that I wasn't fitting into her ideal Instagram vacation, even though she had planned my abandonment in a foreign town, and had laughed as they drove away. All of a sudden, the ridiculousness of it all hit me hard. I had spent decades taking care of other people, raising Nathan by myself after his father abandoned him, helping him through college and his early career, being the ideal mother-in-law who never chastised Elise for her selfishness, and being available to watch my grandchildren whenever I wanted, even if it meant rescheduling my own plans. How had I been compensated for being the one who was dependable, encouraging, and unobtrusive? Abandonment, harshness masquerading as a joke, and the hope that I would obediently go back to my designated role after learning my lesson. Something solidified inside of me while I was sitting in a Portuguese cafe with strangers. It was a choice that had been growing inside of me ever before Nathan left in his car. There was no turning back. Not to Lisbon. Not to the oppressive relationship between Elise and Nathan. Not to the life I'd been leading of cautious accommodation. I didn't have a specific plan or destination in mind. But I had something more valuable for the first time in decades, the ability to follow my own path. With my new goods swinging in a bag at my side, I paid for my lunch and headed back to the bus station. My posture was straighter, and my step was lighter. There was a change within me. They had laid down some unseen burden. A few tight restrictions were relaxed. I was Judith Palmer, a 67-year-old woman living alone in Portugal with only a few belongings and a lifetime of untapped bravery that had suddenly come to the surface. Unbelievably, I also felt more alive than I had in a long time. I brought my meager purchases back to Maria's guest house. In my mind, a rough idea is taking shape. When I arrived, the courtyard was deserted, but a note on my door told me that Maria had left to see her sister and would be back by 6. In meticulous English, she had written, "Make yourself at home. Tea and cookies in the kitchen by myself in the peaceful house." I spread out my new belongings on the bed, including 2 basic cotton dresses, underwear, a light cardigan, toiletries, and a compact crossbody bag that is big enough to hold necessities but manageable compared to my usual purse. Just enough to provide me with options and mobility. I took a shower, washing away the dust of travel and the final remnants of yesterday's fear. I didn't realize my muscles were tense until the hot water relieved them, and when I came out, wrapped in a tiny towel Maria had given me, I felt suddenly refreshed, not just physically cleansed, but also more lucid. I sat near the window, wearing a knee-length blue dress with a delicate pattern that I had recently purchased, and at last I focused on the question I had been avoiding. What comes next? I took out my phone and launched the browser to look for data that could guide my decision-making. Portuguese train timetables, typical hotel rates in different towns, typical Portuguese words, and simple regional maps. My hesitant concept became more and more cemented into a sort of plan as I conducted additional study. Staying in Abidas does not necessarily mean not going back to Nathan. Portugal was a tiny nation with a well-functioning railway network. I could go any place. Coimbra, Porto, and the Algarve. Locations I had read about but never thought I'd go to on my own. Or I could just get out of Portugal. It was only a train ride to Spain. France was, too. In front of me was all of Europe, reachable in ways I had never thought possible. However, one place kept catching my eye. Italy. In particular, Tuscany. For decades, I had been teaching about the Renaissance and displaying slides of Florence, Siena, and the Tuscan countryside's hill villages to my pupils. I had written about the history, art, and architecture of a place I had never visited. I didn't miss the irony. I had stoked students' interest in European history and culture for 30 years. However, I only had 2 prior visits that included hurried tours of Paris and London. Both were meticulously organized by others, and if my tastes were taken into account at all, it was last. My browsing was interrupted by a notice. Nathan texted again. "Mom. Call us, please. We are going to call the police." It nearly made me chuckle since the manipulation was so obvious. Nathan was well aware that I wasn't missing. I had verified my safety. This was just another attempt to coerce me into complying with his demands and to make me feel bad for delaying them. "I responded to your SMS, saying there was no need for the police, I was safe and well, I was taking some time to myself, and I will get back to you in a few days." After that, I went back to my research with a fresh resolve that fueled my quest. I had the outlines of a solid plan within an hour. Lisbon to Madrid by train. I would have to first travel to Lisbon. Spend the night in Madrid. Flight to Florence from Madrid. How long will the accommodations be in Florence? A week? 2? The question's open-ended nature was exciting and frightening at the same time. I could stay as long as I pleased, free from Nathan and Elise's strict schedule, obligations at home, and expectations other than my own. Given that I had paid off my tiny condo before to David's passing, my teacher's pension was modest but adequate. In low-risk investments, the life insurance money he had left me was mostly unaltered. My savings, which I had been prudently saving for. What precisely? Some vague emergency in the future? The nursing home I may require in the future? What if I choose to live at last by using some of those resources I had so carefully saved? I felt a thrill of resentment at the concept. It was a delightful, forbidden feeling that brought back memories of my first and last act of teenage defiance, when I was 16 and skipped school to attend a protest march. I was too preoccupied with my preparations to notice Maria's reappearance until she knocked softly on my open door. "You look different," she said, examining my face and grinning a little. "More. How are you? Located?" I told her, astonished at the assurance in my voice. "I've made a decision. I will not return to my son." Unsurprised, Maria nodded. "Excellent. He isn't worthy of getting you back." "Not quite yet." I explained that it wasn't simply that. "I'm traveling to Florence, Italy." She raised her eyebrows. "Firenze? By yourself?" "Yes," I replied, using a phrase that was both freeing and fearful. "For 30 years, I have been a Renaissance art and history instructor. I've always preferred to view it in its entirety rather than rushing through a guided tour." "Brave," Maria responded with sincere appreciation. "Very courageous. Was it bold or just careless?" I was setting myself up for disaster at 67, lacking any prior experience traveling alone and speaking Italian, but what else could I do? I was thankful for Nathan and Elise's generous forgiveness, but I was also eager to get back to my carefully planned life in Boston. For sporadic visits from grandchildren whose parents had mistreated them so casually? No. Whatever dangers awaited me, they were nothing compared to the certainty of regret if I backed up now. Thinking out loud, I added, "I'll have to get to Lisbon for the train to Madrid." "My brother, João, is driving to Lisbon tomorrow," Maria said. "For commercial purposes. You can go with him." "No issue." I almost started crying at how easy this solution was. "That would be fantastic. I can certainly pay him." Maria dismissed this with a wave. "Very affordable, family price." After a moment of hesitation, she said, "You'll tell your son? Where do you go?" I gave the question serious thought. A part of me wanted to vanish completely, to punish Nathan for his desertion by leaving him to wonder and worry. However, the older part, the part that had brought him up, loved him in spite of his imperfections, and taught him responsibility and consequences, knew better. Yes, I did make up my mind. He needs to know that I'm secure, but not all the specifics. That I made this decision. Maria gave a nod of approval. "Excellent. Not for him. For you." Clear conscience. She went to make dinner, and I wrote Nathan a parting note. I've made the decision to keep traveling alone for the time being. I have everything I need and am safe. This is my decision, not a request for assistance or an effort to discipline you. I need some space and time to reflect on what transpired and how it affects our relationship. When I'm ready, I'll get in contact. Please honor my choice. A lifetime of parental accommodation caused me to question my determination, so I paused over the send button. Then I recalled his giggling as they drove off, abandoning me in a strange land, scared and alone. After hitting send, I disabled Nathan's and Elise's notifications. I didn't need to see them, no matter what manipulative, guilt-inducing responses they would send. Not right now, when my newly discovered bravery seemed so brittle and uncertain. I ate dinner in the courtyard with Maria and her brother João that night. The straightforward dinner of roasted veggies, grilled fish, and regional wine was more filling than any of the pricey eateries Nathan and Elise had selected for our genuine Portuguese encounter. The following day, João, a barrel-chested man in his early 70s with sparkling eyes and a loud chuckle, volunteered to drive me to Lisbon. In fluent but accented English, he stated, "I leave at 8:30. It's the ideal moment to avoid traffic. You'll arrive in Lisbon prior to lunchtime." I experienced an odd sensation of calm as night fell and the courtyard was softly illuminated by tiny white lights strung amid the lemon trees. I would depart from this unexpected haven tomorrow. I would really go out on my own tomorrow. However, tonight, despite our language barriers, I allowed myself to just be present and enjoy the food, wine, warm night air, and the pleasant discussion that flowed about and included me, all while being surrounded by the generosity of strangers who had become something like friends. I was truly happy for the first time since Nathan had driven away, not simply resigned or determined, a tiny, delicate flame of delight that I carefully cradled in my hands to shield it from the winds of worry and uncertainty that continued to blow through my head. Tomorrow, I was going out, not coming back. As I sipped my wine and listened to the night noises of abatos reverberating through the old stone walls, this distinction felt deeply significant. It was a warm and clear morning. Portugal on a lovely late spring day. I had slept unusually well, and even though I still had occasional doubts, my subconscious seemed to support my decision to go it alone. We ate a modest breakfast in the courtyard, which Maria had prepared. It included slices of perfectly ripe melon, fresh bread, strong coffee, and local cheese. As we were wrapping up, João showed up, refusing coffee but accepting a glass of fresh orange juice instead. "Are you up for an adventure?" As he assisted me in carrying my small belongings to his car, he winked at me. On a side street next to the guest house was a clean, older Peugeot. I said, "As ready as I'll ever be," and was shocked to learn that it was accurate. A jittery exhilaration that I hadn't experienced in decades had taken the place of the crushing anxiety that had gripped me 2 days prior. Maria's farewell was very poignant. When I was drowning in fear and uncertainty, this woman, who had only been a stranger 48 hours before, became more like a friend. I used one of the few Portuguese words I knew, obrigada, for everything. "De nada," she said, giving me a hearty embrace. "You'll be all right. You underestimate your strength." I glanced back at the medieval walls that had seen my abandonment and eventual rebirth as João made his way through Abitas's winding streets. This little village has changed from being the place where I was humiliated to becoming the starting point for an adventure I never would have thought possible in just 2 days. "Where do you go in Lisbon?" As we turned into the main highway and headed south, João inquired. I informed him it was the Santa Apollonia train station. I had purchased a ticket for the overnight train to Madrid, which was scheduled to leave at 9:30 that night. The extended time between our arrival in Lisbon and the departure of my train would allow me to take my time exploring the city. I wouldn't have to rush from one photo op to the next or check my watch to make sure I wasn't bothering anyone. "You take the train, I see." João gave a nod of approval. "A good way to tour the country. Where do you go?" I explained that it was Madrid first, then Florence. "Firenze." His expression brightened. "Lovely city. I visited my wife many years ago before she passed away." "I apologize," I said without thinking. Regarding your spouse. With a gesture of acquiescence, he shrugged. It's been 10 years. Life goes on. He gave me a look. You lose your hubby too? I affirmed that 3 years prior. Heart attack. A moment of understanding passed between us as Juan nodded. He continued. He went on to say, that strange camaraderie of those who have watched loved ones slip away, who have rebuilt lives around absences. His tone lightened as he said, and now, new adventure. Yes, it's never too late. Yes, I did agree, and the simple confirmation seemed like a self-promise. It's never too late. João was great company on the drive to Lisbon, which took less than 2 hours. He asked insightful questions about my life in Boston, pointed out locations, and related stories about growing up in dictatorship-era Portugal. To remind me of my loss, it was different from the stilted, cautious talks I'd become used to since David's passing, where friends and family seemed scared to say the wrong thing. This conversation touched on loss without delving deeply into it. Joe insisted on guiding me into the train station when we arrived and made sure I knew where to put my suitcase and how to locate my platform thereafter. Like Maria, he showed compassion without expecting anything in return or passing judgment. It was a straightforward human connection that made no demands of others. As we separated, his wrinkled hands momentarily clasped mine and he murmured, Boa viachum. Well done on your journey. I said, thank you for everything, with meanings that extended beyond the ride he had given me. After he departed, I put my little luggage in a locker and started to explore Lisbon at my own leisure, with no specific plans. The liberation was euphoric. I strolled through the Alfama district's winding lanes, stopping whenever something attracted my attention. A cafe with a view that made you want to stay, a little store selling artisan goods, and an intricately tiled front. I ordered an espresso and a croissant at one of these cafes, which was situated on a hill with the Tagus River sparkling below. It was then that I took out my phone for the first time that day. Curious about Nathan's reaction to my statement of independence, I had turned notifications back on. The texts ranged in tone from outrage, "This is so self-centered, Mom," to worry, "Are you really all right by yourself?" to something like repentance. "Please don't punish us in this way even though I know what we did was wrong." The most recent, which was submitted an hour earlier, appeared to be nearly resignation. "To let us know you're safe, at least let us know where you're going." I gave my response a lot of thought. His belief that I couldn't handle things on my own still made me angry. That rather than regaining my independence, I chose to travel on my own to punish him. Nevertheless, despite everything, the mother instinct to comfort and shield from anxiety persisted. At last, I wrote, "I'm in Lisbon today, and after that, I'm going to other European places that I've always wanted to see in detail. I'm doing well, meeting friends, figuring things out, and like having the flexibility to go at my own speed. This has nothing to do with punishment. After decades of prioritizing everyone else, it's about doing something for me at last. I will frequently check in to let you know that I am safe." After a moment of hesitation, I said, "I love you, but I don't like how you treated me. When I'm ready, we'll have to talk about that. Please respect my path for the time being." I put my phone back in my backpack after sending the message and turned it off entirely. Whatever Nathan's answer, I didn't need it to ruin this day, which was all mine. The hours flew by in a delightful fog of discovery. I strolled about the Praça do Comércio, went to the Sé Cathedral, and stopped at a little eatery for a leisurely meal of grilled sardines and vinho verde. Nobody hurried me. Nobody objected to me taking too much time to appreciate a certain view or architectural element. No one sighed sharply as they looked at the clock or frantically flipped through their phone while they waited for me to finish eating. I returned to the train station by late afternoon, stopping at a little market to get bread, cheese, fruit, and a bottle of water for the night. As I picked out a pear that caught my eye, scrutinizing it with perhaps needless attention, I became aware that I was grinning, a tiny, personal grin of happiness that had nothing to do with the approval or satisfaction of others. This is what freedom feels like, I thought. I easily located my platform at the station after retrieving my suitcase. My reserved seat in a second-class compartment was cozy enough for the nighttime trip on the clean, contemporary train to Madrid. I experienced a strange lightness as we left Lisbon, the lights of the city starting to shine in the encroaching darkness. It was as though, by letting go of Nathan's treachery, I was also letting go of the burden of expectations and commitments that I had carried for so long. Across from me, an old Portuguese woman smiled and held out a package of biscuits. For the trip. She pretended to eat as she spoke. Obrigada, I said, grinning as I took one. I enjoyed the simple cookie and the even simpler generosity of its offering as the train picked up pace, taking me to Madrid and then Florence, and who knew what other places may be on the horizon. Even though my voyage was just getting started, I was already finding a more giving and approachable world than I had ever dared to hope for in my cautious, limited life. With every click of the rails, Portugal receded behind me as the countryside went past in growing darkness. Spain, Italy, and the untold tale of Judith Palmer's potential self when she at last, belatedly, asserted her right to her own journey were all ahead. At Cota station was a flurry of commuter activity and early morning light as Madrid arrived. Surprisingly, I had slept well on the train, soothed by the soft rocking of the carriage and the steady clacking of wheels on rails. I felt a strange mix of excitement and tiredness as I disembarked with my little luggage and wrinkled clothes. Using my limited knowledge of Spanish, which I had taught about but never really acquired, I bought a ticket and made my way through the station rather easily, following the signs to the metro. I was really taken aback by the ticket agent's quick-witted reaction, but his finger-pointing gave me enough guidance. I had many hours to explore Madrid before my trip to Florence, which was scheduled for late afternoon. With more assurance than I actually had, I located a cafe close to the station and ordered a café with leche y tostada for breakfast. I just nodded and smiled as the server answered in a flurry of Spanish, and I got exactly what I had requested along with a tiny glass of fresh orange juice. I sipped the expertly brewed coffee and thought about small successes. It would have appeared impossible to place an order in a foreign cafe 2 days ago. Now, that was just the first of many minor obstacles I would overcome along the way. I put my suitcase in a station locker after breakfast and went exploring. I had no plans other than to take in the city, so I went from Plaza Mayor's grandeur to Retiro Park's beauty, stopping whenever something drew my attention. I bought a little sketchbook and pencil from a stationery store, and to my surprise, I sat on a park bench and tried to draw the scene in front of me: kids playing by a fountain, old men talking animatedly, a young couple engrossed in each other's gaze. Even though the sketch was rudimentary at best, it was really fulfilling to make it, to actually see my surroundings instead of just looking at them. When was the last time I drew anything? Definitely not since my art history classes in college, where I had to use sketches to analyze visuals. That minor pleasure had been abandoned somewhere down the line because it was thought to be pointless or time-consuming in a life that was becoming more and more characterized by duty and efficiency. An old man who stopped by my bench and nodded at my sketch said, "Muy bonito." "Gracias," I answered, blushing from the sudden attention. "It's not very good." He disagreed with my self-deprecation and shook his head. "Es honesto." He tapped his heart as he spoke. "Not from here." He gestured toward his eyes before making a camera-like motion. I instantly grasped what he meant, that even if my sketch was technically flawed, it captured an authenticity that a photograph alone might not be able to capture. I was genuinely moved by the observation. It somehow validated this whole unlikely adventure, not just my mediocre drawing. I returned to the station by mid-afternoon, picked up my stuff, and rode the metro to the airport. Everything went smoothly, including locating my gate, negotiating security, and checking in. More proof that I was more competent than either Nathan or I had thought I was. Although the flight to Florence was short, just over 2 hours, my pulse rate increased with a mix of excitement and anxiety as the plane started to descend. It was this. The heart of Renaissance art and architecture, the city I had spent decades teaching about, the town whose history I knew well but whose reality I had never encountered. Additionally, I was traveling alone, without a guided tour or a comprehensive plan, and just having reservations for the first 2 nights at a modest hotel I had reserved from Madrid. What the devil was I thinking, knowing nothing more than a few sentences from an app one downloaded at the airport? As I gathered my belongings and followed directions to ground transportation, the question continued to echo. Travel fatigue and a growing wave of self-doubt were catching up with me. I had no specific intentions other than a few nights' lodging, and I was 67 years old and alone in a new nation where I didn't understand the language. Was this an adventure, or just stupidity? Do you need a cab, Signora? A middle-aged man with a clipboard standing close to the exit in a well-ironed uniform asked the question. Yes, please, I said, feeling a wave of relief at this minor help. Borgo Santi Apostoli's Hotel Alessandra. He made a note on his clipboard and nodded. Very good hotel in the historic center, he remarked. Please follow me. He talked quickly to a driver and then, with a little flourish, opened the back door for me as I followed him to a line of waiting cabs. Take pleasure in Firenze, he urged. The world's most beautiful city. During the 25-minute drive from Florence's little airport to the city's historic center, I rubbed my face against the window like a curious child, soaking up my first impressions of the city that I had told innumerable pupils about over the years. The golden warmth of the late afternoon sun softened the edges of antique structures and added to their grandeur. Tears suddenly came to my eyes as we crossed the Arno River and saw the famous Ponte Vecchio, which is visible just downstream. I was present. I was truly here, witnessing firsthand what I had previously only read about in art history books and images. After navigating progressively smaller streets, the taxi came to a stop in front of a tiny entryway that read Hotel Alessandra on a little brass plaque. The driver directed me to an intercom next to the door and assisted me with my suitcase. He said, "Ring for reception. They send you an elevator." The twilight shadows became longer as I stood alone on a Florentine street after thanking him, paying the fare with a little tip, and watching him drive away. Panic briefly loomed, the same crippling terror I'd experienced when Nathan drove off in Portugal. However, I took a big breath and hit the intercom button. A happy female voice answered, "Hotel Alessandra, buonasera." "Hello," I said. "I'm on a reservation." "Palmer, Judith." "Yes, we do expect you, Signora Palmer. Please come up." When the buzzer sounded, I pushed open the heavy door to see a little elevator. In reality, it was a dumbwaiter that had been transformed, waiting to transport me to the third-floor hotel lobby. The antiquated device made a startling creaking noise as it rose, but it brought me safely to a reception room that was as cozy and inviting as it was unassuming. Behind the desk, a happy young woman was met by Benvenuta of Firenze. "Greetings, Signora Palmer, from Florence. Having you here makes us very happy." Her sincere hospitality evoked yet another unanticipated emotional response. I was exhausted, confused, and still doubting my own wisdom for setting out on this adventure. However, I was being greeted here in Florence as though my visit was not just anticipated but also honored. I forced myself to blink back tears and say, "Thank you. Being here makes me incredibly happy." I was escorted to a tiny but quaint room with a window facing out onto a quiet street after checking in. Simple furniture included a wardrobe, a desk, a double bed with a wrought iron frame, and an en-suite bathroom that was just big enough to turn around in. However, everything was carefully laid out and spotless. According to the receptionist, breakfast is offered from 7 to 10. Additionally, don't hesitate to ask at the desk for help if you need it with reservations, tours, or anything else. We are available to assist. I fell onto the bed after she was gone. The magnitude of my actions eventually caught up with me. Using only my cunning and willpower, I had navigated trains, airplanes, and taxis on my way from Portugal to Spain to Italy. Answerable only to myself, I found myself in Florence, a place I had yearned to see for as long as I could remember. It was a crushing reality. I allowed the tears fall, not of remorse or fear but of something deeper and ultimately freeing, as I reclined on the bed without even taking off my shoes. After days of racing on adrenaline and newly discovered courage, it could be relief, affirmation, or just a release of tension. Outside my window, as dusk turned to night, I fell asleep while still completely dressed. The sounds of an evening in Florence. From my first night in the city of my dreams, distant conversations, the occasional scooter, and church bells ringing the hour created a soft lullaby. I awoke to the sound of distant church bells and sunshine filtering through gauzy curtains. I lay confused for a moment. I have no idea how I got there or where I was. Then memories returned. The resolve to go it alone, the trek to Florence, and the abandonment in Portugal. Florence. Florence was where I was. I woke up abruptly, even though I had been sleeping in my clothes. It was just past 7, according to my watch, which gave me enough time in the day to start visiting the city I had been teaching about for decades but had never seen. I changed into one of my 2 dresses and took a brief shower before heading down to the hotel's tiny breakfast area. Coffee, yogurt, fruit, and fresh pastries were available at a small buffet. As cafes spread out tables and stores hoisted awnings, I filled a plate and sat at the window, watching the street below come to life. Florence for the first time? An American woman of my age, sitting at an adjacent table, asked the inquiry. I did admit it. It feels strange to be here at last, even though I have been teaching Renaissance art and history for 40 years. An instructor. How lovely. She identified herself as Margaret, a Chicago-based retired librarian who was on the road with her still slumbering sister. There must be a long list of things you would like to see. I said, too many for the short time I have, but I hadn't really established a departure date. My journey's unpredictability still felt both thrilling and worrisome. Well, Susan and I are going to the Uffizi this morning if you want some company. We invite you to join us. The thought of having amiable, English-speaking friends to help me get through my first day in Florence made the invitation alluring. But I was slowed down by something. I had just gotten out of a trip where the priorities and speed were set by others. Did I want to be around new people right away, even if they were nice? I cautiously answered, "That's very kind, but I believe I should go through this first day alone. Perhaps at a later date?" Margaret nodded, her eyes full of comprehension. Of course, sometimes the greatest way to truly experience a location is to be alone. She gave me a napkin that she had scrawled on. If you decide to change your mind or would like to meet up later during your stay, here is my email address. Sincerely moved by the gesture, I placed the napkin into my purse. Thank you. I spoke with the kind receptionist after breakfast, and she indicated on a map a straightforward walking path that would go to the Duomo. The Ponte Vecchio comes next, followed by the Piazza della Signoria. These 3 for the first day. She told me that was a really good introduction to Florence. Maybe museums tomorrow. I can assist with reservations. Equipped with my map, a bottle of water, and an impression of awe, I stepped out into the Florentine morning. The winding alleyways periodically opened into smaller piazzas, each with its own unique character, such as a small market, a group of cafes, or a local church. I took my time walking, taking in information that I may have missed if I had hurried. The elaborate ironwork on balconies, the Madonna shrines hidden in building corners, and the way light and shadow interact on facades that date back centuries. I let out a loud gasp as I rounded a curve and saw the Duomo suddenly rise in front of me. The size and complexity of Brunelleschi's dome and the multicolored marble facade were beyond my comprehension in any snapshot. I stood in awe. Unaware of the tourist throng circling me, I was witnessing firsthand what I had spent decades explaining to pupils through slideshows and impassioned words. I took out my sketchbook, found a place against a wall where I wouldn't obstruct pedestrian traffic, and tried to sketch a single detail, a section of the campanile where Giotto's design used various colored marbles in geometric patterns, rather than the entire cathedral, which is impossible. Time seemed to slow down as I drew, the bustle of the square fading away as I concentrated solely on the way light played off the stone, the exact proportions of the shapes, and the core of what made this building not just remarkable but transcendent. "Molto bene," said a voice next to me. An old Italian man was looking at my drawing when I looked up. "Are you an artist?" I responded, blushing from the attention. "No," I replied, "I'm just a tourist, but I spent many years teaching art history." Ah, comprehension flashed up his face. "You have an educated eye, and you're not just taking pictures like." I laughed as he imitated the quick movement and rapid-fire clicking of a camera. "Just that," I said. "I don't just want to look, I want to see." He gave a nod of approval. This is the proper method to get to know Florence. Slow, heart-centered, not just eye-focused. First he tapped his forehead, then his chest. "Signora, enjoy my city. She has a lot to share with you. I became aware that I was grinning as he left, a sincere, profound smile that didn't seem natural on my face. When was the last time I had experienced such unadulterated joy? This feeling of accomplishing precisely what I wanted to do and being exactly where I should be? Continuing my exploration, I went from the Duomo to the Piazza della Signoria, where, like in the Renaissance, replicas of well-known sculptures, such as Michelangelo's David, stood outdoors. I ordered an espresso and a tiny pastry from a cafe on the square's edge, pleased to just watch life unfold in this historic area. For the first time since coming to Florence, I had considered checking my phone when it buzzed in my purse. The screen displayed a number of Nathan's messages, each with a tone that changed from rage to worry to something that resembled repentance. "It's gone far enough, Mom. Tell us where you are. We are concerned for you. You're not like this. Tell us that you're safe, please. I apologize for the events in Portugal. We were mistaken. Please return." I was taken aback by the last communication, which was sent an hour ago. "Tell us where you are so we don't have to worry if you truly want to do this." I thought wryly, progress. At least it acknowledged that I could genuinely wish to travel on my own, even if it didn't acknowledge that I had the right to do so. After giving my response considerable thought, I typed, "I'm in Florence, Hotel Alessandra. I need this time for myself, but I'm content and safe and will check in every few days." I sent the message, shut off my phone, and put it back in my purse. It could wait, no matter what Nathan said. I was the only one who should have this lovely, sunny Florentine day. I went on to the Ponte Vecchio, the historic bridge that crossed the Arno River and was dotted with jewelry stores. I leaned on the stone railing in the middle of the bridge and looked down at the water. At the distant hills outside the city, at the structures along the riverbanks. I had a deep, peaceful joy that felt like returning home to myself after a long absence. It wasn't really gladness, which seemed like too busy a feeling. When I found myself standing on a bridge that had seen centuries of human drama, I suddenly realized why I had needed this trip. It wasn't simply about claiming my independence or seeing Florence. It was about finding the woman I had been before life's responsibilities and accommodations had gradually wiped her out, the fervent educator, the inquisitive intellect, the spirit that could be brought to tears by beauty. When Nathan left in Portugal, that woman was still there. When I eventually worked up the nerve to release her, she was there, eagerly waiting to come out. Days turned into weeks, then 2, as Florence's Renaissance embrace engulfed me. I settled into a rhythm that was both new and instinctive. Early mornings spent sketching in peaceful cafes, days spent exploring churches and museums at my own leisure, and nights spent taking in the sunset from various city viewpoints. I had left the Hotel Alessandra for a modest apartment in the less-traveled Oltrarno neighborhood, which I had discovered through the cousin of the receptionist. It was a small but quaint room in a 16th-century building next to Santo Spirito, across the Arno. It was a month-to-month rental. A degree of adaptability that fit my as-yet undefined plans. I learned how to make basic Italian meals in the little kitchen of my flat using supplies I bought from the local mercado. One of my unexpected pleasures became the daily routine of choosing fresh vegetables, testing my expanding vocabulary of Italian with patient vendors, and bringing my goodies home in a woven market bag. I had made it a habit to check my phone every few days and send Nathan quick updates. I went to the Uffizi today while I was still in Florence. Everything is good. And sometimes answering Susan's fewer and fewer questions about when I might be going back to Boston. As the weeks went by, the urgency of these messages had lessened, and it became evident that I was not in danger or experiencing a nervous breakdown, but rather had just chosen a different course than I had anticipated. I had taken a seat at my favorite cafe in the little piazza next to my flat on this specific morning, a Tuesday in late June, which was warm but not yet unbearably hot. Giorgio, the proprietor, called me by name and brought my customary order, a small cornetto and a cafe macchiato, without my having to ask. He remarked, "Buongiorno, Signora Judith," and he put my breakfast down with a flourish. "Beautiful day," I said, my vocabulary growing every day despite my awful accent. As I opened my sketchbook to a new page with the intention of drawing the old wellhead in the middle of the plaza, I heard someone nearby speak. Since the Duomo, you've become better. The old Italian man who had commented on my art on my first day in Florence was there when I looked up. His eyes were sparkling with recognition as he stood next to my table, leaning slightly on a walking stick. Surprised and thrilled that he would remember our brief meeting from weeks ago, I remarked, "You remember? The American teacher with the artistic eye, of course." He pointed to the vacant seat on the other side of me. "Could I come along? I need to relax my elderly legs." I closed my sketchbook and murmured, "Please. My name is Judith." "Antonio," he said, gingerly settling into the chair. "Ricci, Antonio." Giorgio showed up right away. With the friendly familiarity of a long-time acquaintance, he greeted Antonio. After they exchanged quick Italian that I couldn't understand, Antonio was served an espresso a little while later. Antonio sipped his coffee and said, "You're still in Florence. No short vacation for you." "No," I concurred. "I'm staying longer." He nodded, as though this clarified everything. "You've been caught by Florence." This is particularly true for people who can see. Antonio's straightforwardness and lack of flimsy politeness encouraged honesty in some way. I had to explain that I was meant to be on a family vacation. My kid got into a fight with his wife. They abandoned me in a Portuguese little town. After a moment of surprise, Antonio's bushy white eyebrows drew together in disdain. "Abandoned you? By yourself?" The admission still hurt, but not as much as it had previously. They assumed that I would call them right away and plead with them to come get me. I chose to travel alone instead. His simple words, "Brava," warmed me more than I had anticipated. Very courageous. Or really stupid, I smiled self-deprecatingly. I'm 67 years old, have no prior travel experience, and speak only a few languages. Antonio dismissed this as unimportant. Fearlessness is not the same as courage. Fear but action is courage. With sharp eyes that didn't miss anything, he examined me. I said, "You were taught history. In particular, Renaissance history and art." His face glowed with sincere joy. "Perfect. And now you can actually see what you've been teaching for years." "That's right. Sometimes it's too much to handle." We had an easy talk about art, history, travel, and life in the greatest way possible. I found out that Antonio, a 72-year-old retired professor of literature, had spent 40 years teaching at the University of Florence. He split his time between his flat in the city and a tiny country estate in the hills outside of Montepulciano, where his family had been making wine for centuries, after becoming a widower 15 years ago. "Nothing big," he told me. "Small-scale manufacturing using conventional techniques. I assist during harvest, but my nephew now handles it." I noticed that I was more enthusiastic and involved in our chat than I had been in years. Antonio paid close attention, made perceptive inquiries, and shared observations that demonstrated his wisdom and intelligence. There were none of the small cues of impatience or boredom that I had become used to seeing in conversations with Nathan and Elise, such as checking watches or looking at phones. Antonio inquired as to whether I had yet to visit the Brancacci chapel when Giorgio brought our second cup of coffee. He shook his head mockingly when I told him I hadn't. Frescoes by Masaccio. Vital. Innovative use of light and perspective. Without seeing, it is impossible to fully comprehend the Florentine Renaissance. He looked at his timepiece. "It's open right now, not far away." "Maybe." The invitation lingered between us. It was not assumed, it was merely extended. I noticed that I was nodding before I had made a deliberate choice. "If you're certain it's not an imposition," I answered, "I'd like that." "Imposition?" He seems truly perplexed. "To show outstanding work to someone who will value it? This is not a hardship, it is pleasure." After finishing our coffee, we started moving slowly enough to accommodate his walking stick and my preference for taking in information rather than rushing from one location to another. Antonio pointed out historical details and architectural elements that I could have missed while we strolled. The Brancacci chapel, located inside the larger church of Santa Maria del Carmine, was empty when we arrived, with just a few people there. Other features include the stone tabernacles at street corners, the family crests engraved in building facades, and the minor variations in construction techniques over centuries. Antonio guided me to a particular location where the light best emphasized Masacci's departure from Eden. He murmured softly, "Look. The first genuinely human figures in Renaissance art, real people experiencing genuine sorrow, not idealized or allegorical." I looked at the fresco, realizing for the first time what I had only seen in pictures, the unadulterated emotion on Eve's face, the anguish in Adam's stance. The groundbreaking realism that had sparked the Renaissance. Unexpectedly, tears pinched beneath my eyelids. I muttered, "It's extraordinary." Antonio said, "Yes," in a similarly quiet voice. Humanity appeared out of nowhere after thousands of years of stylized Byzantine culture. Actual bodies. Genuine feelings. A smile wrinkled the corners of his eyes as he looked at me. Paint revolution. We were in the chapel for more than an hour. Antonio highlighted specifics and clarified circumstances that I had previously taught but had never completely understood without physically viewing the piece. Although his expertise was extensive, it was presented as a shared enthusiasm rather than as academic bragging. He then recommended a tiny trattoria close for lunch, not for tourists but for authentic Florentine cuisine. Over glasses of Chianti and platters of pappardelle with wild boar ragout, I found myself accepting without question. We discussed a wide range of topics, including literature, art, and our individual teaching experiences. "What about your family?" Finally, he asked. "Who is the son who left you in Portugal? Have you made up?" With a groan, I put down my fork. "Not precisely. We haven't communicated much. He is aware of my location and my safety, but we haven't discussed what transpired." Antonio gave a contemplative nod. "Sometimes real understanding may only be achieved through distance." I said, "That's what I'm hoping." Before I could approach him without reverting to my old habits, I had to rediscover who I was. "Have you, too? Have you found yourself?" I paused at the question, which was posed without bias or expectation. Had I? Undoubtedly, these weeks in Florence had reawakened long-dormant elements of me. My love of art and history, my ability to be alone, and my aptitude at adjusting to new situations. Was that, however, the same as actually discovering who I was? Sincerely, I said, "I'm not sure. I believe I'm still going through it." When Antonio smiled, his grizzled face took on a radiant look. "Excellent response. Discovering oneself is a journey rather than a destination. Indeed, always evolving." Antonio informed us that he would be going back to his rural property the following week as we completed our lunch with little cups of espresso. The city will soon experience summer heat. Hills are better. Cooler. Less noisy. Sincerely, I said, "It sounds lovely. Perhaps, if you wish to see different parts of Tuscany, you might visit, as my guest," he said after he paused. "The guest home is cozy despite its small size. An excellent starting point for touring hill towns." I was taken aback by the invitation. Even though we had only been together for a few hours, there was a comfort between us that belied our short acquaintance. However, caution flags were raised by prudence. I was a lone woman in a faraway land, pondering a man I hardly knew inviting me to his remote property. I felt like Antonio could read my mind. Of course, no pressure. Sophia, my housekeeper, is constantly present. She would cook and clean your room in a really polite manner. His eyes glowed. "I am not a dangerous man, I am an elderly professor." I couldn't help but smile at his candor. "Let me consider it." "Naturally." He pulled out a business card from his pocket. "My phone? Email. You make the decision." Antonio held my hand for a moment as we left the trattoria. "I'm grateful that you shared Masaccio with me today. It's a gift to see great art from new perspectives." I said, "Thank you for showing me. It was so much more significant because of your insights." I flipped the surprise invitation over in my head as I made my way back to my flat in the brilliant afternoon light. Indeed, the scenery surrounding Montepulciano was said to be breathtaking, and I had eventually thought of venturing outside of Florence. However, was I prepared to accept this kind of invitation? To have faith in both Antonio, whose honesty I suspected but was unable to verify, and my own judgment, which had just been shattered by Nathan's treachery. Neither accepting nor rejecting the possibilities Antonio's card represented, I slid it into my purse. The choice didn't have to be made right away, like so much else on this trip. After decades of putting other people's wants and preferences ahead of my own, I was still getting used to the luxury of being able to sit with it, weigh all the options, and make a decision based on what I really wanted. For now, my head was filled with Masacciо's groundbreaking paintings, my stomach was satiated by a delectable lunch, and my heart was lightened by the warm recollection of a chat with a kindred spirit. For one extraordinary day in my still-developing renaissance, it was more than sufficient. The following week was a lovely haze of museum trips, leisurely strolls, and more assured conversations in my limited but improving Italian. I woke up every morning to sunlight flowing through the shutters of my apartment and the sounds of Florence coming to life in the distance, church bells, delivery vehicles, and conversations coming up from the street below. I couldn't help but think of Antonio's invitation, neither rejected nor accepted. I was forced to consider every possible scenario. The countryside would provide much-needed relief from Florence's rising summer temperatures and burgeoning visitor population. My travel itinerary included Montepulciano and the nearby hill villages. The housekeeper's presence allayed worries about safety. Deeper problems, however, were hidden beneath these pragmatic considerations. Was I prepared to be hosted by someone who was still almost unknown to me? After being so recently shaken by the shock of Nathan's deception, did I trust my own judgment? And was this invitation more than that? Not romance per se, but the possibility of a relationship I wasn't sure I was ready to handle. With Antonio's business card in hand, I took my coffee to the small balcony that overlooked the street on one especially warm morning. The man himself appeared to be reflected in the cream-colored card's exquisite simplicity with its embossed calligraphy, which was classic but modest and refined without pretense. Inside the flat, my phone buzzed in the characteristic manner I had come to associate with Nathan's calls. With a groan, I put down my coffee to get it. Our correspondence had become consistent. I sent him brief text updates every few days, and depending on my emotional fortitude, I occasionally took his calls and occasionally didn't. I made the decision to respond today. "Hi there, Nathan." "Mom." There was a mixture of relief and caution in his voice. "I was starting to suspect you weren't returning my calls." I acknowledged that there are moments when I am candid in a way that was not feasible before to Portugal. "I need space sometimes." He stayed quiet for a while, taking in this unusual candor. "How are you?" At last, he inquired in a gentler voice. "I'm doing fine. Actually, quite well." I took my phone back to the balcony. "Florence concurs with me. You've been there for nearly a month." There was a hint of judgment in his voice. "It's time to." "To what, don't you think?" To our surprise, I interjected. "Is it time to return home? Is it time to go back to where I belong? Is it time to act as if nothing occurred?" There was a longer hush this time. His voice was uncertain as he spoke again. "Time to let us know your plans," I was about to say, but now I hear how it sounds. Progress, I thought. Real, albeit small. "Nathan, I don't have any particular plans." The ordinary image became beautiful as I observed an elderly Italian woman picking tomatoes with care at the small supermarket across the street. "I like having the freedom to choose what I want to accomplish on a daily basis." "That doesn't sound like you," he remarked, his tone slightly accusatory. I admitted that it might not sound like the mother you knew, but it might sound just like the person I am or will be. "Mom." He paused, obviously having difficulty. "What took happening in Portugal?" "We were mistaken, Elise and I. Since then, we've discussed it a lot. I feel a great deal of shame because it was unsafe and harsh. But the late apology came to me like a refreshing shower. It wasn't until they were finally said that I realized how much I had needed to hear these words. I mutely said, "Thank you for saying that." It has a lot of meaning for me. He went on, I want to make it right. Please tell me how to fix it. I was moved by how straightforward his request was. However, I saw the pattern. Nathan wanted a clear route to forgiveness, a specific assignment that would put things back in order and make him feel less guilty. I gently reminded him that it's not that easy. What transpired in Portugal exposed a basic aspect of our relationship and your perception of me. And the way I've permitted myself to be perceived. No amount of apologies or gesture can make that right. What do you want from me, then? His query was tinted by a flash of the old impatience. Time, I said plainly. Time to discover my identity beyond being your mother. And finally, when I'm ready, a discussion about establishing a new relationship that is founded on respect for one another rather than duty and compromise. When is that going to happen? He pushed. When are you going to be prepared? I said, I don't know yet. But Nathan, I'll be home. Not yet, though. I remained on the balcony for a while after we hung up, replaying our talk in my head. I thought Nathan's apology had been sincere. However, his assumption that we could swiftly end 30 years of toxic relationships made clear how much work remained. Antonio's card, still in my hand, caught my attention. Maybe what I needed right now was to take another step into the unknown rather than go back to what I knew, to move consciously toward a future I had chosen for myself rather than escaping it. Having made up my mind, I picked up my phone once more and dialed the card's number. The third ring was answered by Antonio. When I introduced myself, his voice warmed with gratified surprise. I hoped you would call, Judith. Despite my resolve, I was instantly anxious as I answered, I've been considering your invitation. In order to go to Montepulciano. Yes, there was a lot of patient inquiry in that one word. If the offer is still in effect, I would like to accept. It stands, of course. Even on the phone, his excitement was evident. What time do you want to arrive? Tomorrow is my departure from Florence, but any time after that is fine. The next weekend, we made a decision. Allowing me to complete my business in Florence, notify my landlady, choose which belongings to keep and which to part with, and make a last trip to my favorite cafes and museums. Antonio insisted on sending a car to take me to the property. For tourists, driving in rural areas might be confusing. Luca, my nephew, will come get you. Incredibly trustworthy. Superb English. We arranged the specifics and then had a little conversation about the weather. Florence is getting hotter, the hills are getting pleasantly warm, the city is getting more busy with tourists, smaller towns are easier to handle, and as I continue to explore the city, I come to a little church next to my flat that has an unknown Botticelli. Antonio mentioned something that surprised me just as we were about to end the call. Thank you for calling, Judith. Not everyone sees the chance for a fresh chapter when it presents itself. As I started getting ready for this next round of my journey, the straightforward observation remained with me. A fresh chapter. This was precisely that. The intentional turning of a page to see what might be written next, not an escape or an ending. The days that followed were filled with little chores and farewell ceremonies. Giorgio insisted on giving me a little bag of his unique roast on our final coffee date. He winked and told that it was for countryside and morning coffee. In order for you to remember Firenze. For last, lingering glances at pieces that had grown to be like friends, I went to my favorite museums. Fra Angelico's calm Annunciation frescoes, Michelangelo's David, and Botticelli's Birth of Venus. In each instance, I let go of the need to memorize or analyze that had marked my initial visits and instead allowed myself to simply take in their beauty. I took a stroll to the Piazzale Michelangelo on my final night in Florence. I ascended the stairs to the expansive terrace, which provided expansive city views. The Renaissance cityscape was illuminated by golden light as the sun sank. Like beacons from another era, Giotto's campanile and the Duomo's characteristic dome rose above the sea of terracotta roofs. I was overcome with a deep sense of thankfulness as I looked out over the metropolis that had protected and changed me. Still grieving from betrayal and abandonment, I had come to Florence shattered and unsure. Not because Florence had healed me, but because it had given me the beauty and space I needed to heal myself, I would depart full and determined. Before turning in for the night, I texted Nathan one last time. Going on to spend some time in the Tuscan countryside. We will check our messages every few days, but our cell service will be limited. Everything is good. He answered in a flash. The landscape sounds pleasant. Be careful. You are missed. We gave me pause, with Nathan speaking for Elise and himself, presuming a unity of feeling that I didn't think existed. Nevertheless, I liked the sentiment, the recognition that my departure left a vacuum in their life, no matter how awkward or inconvenient. I stuffed my few possessions into the little bag I had bought in Madrid, what seemed like ages ago, in the morning. I felt a twinge of sadness as I looked around the small flat that had housed me for almost a month. However, this departure was intentional, selected, and a part of a trip rather than an escape, in contrast to my hasty departure from Portugal. Luca, a dashing man in his early 30s with Antonio's eyes and a casual smile, showed up exactly at the scheduled hour. With a flourish, he opened the passenger door of a clean Alfa Romeo and stuffed my bag into the trunk. Signora Palmer, welcome. I've heard good things about you from my uncle. I'm supposed to take you to La Colombia safely. La Colombia? Unaware of the term, I repeated. He translated it as the Dovecot. It is the name of the old tower where doves used to nest on our family's property. He smiled. Instead of birds, it now holds wine. I saw Florence fade away in the side mirror as we drove away, its domes and spires gradually giving way to the softer Tuscan countryside. Up ahead were undulating hills blanketed in olive groves and vineyards, medieval hill towns perched atop far-off heights, and cypress trees guarding twisting roadways. As the landscape spread out in front of me in all its sun-drenched splendor, I felt more excited than nervous. I had no idea what lay ahead in La Colombia, what this next chapter would hold. Of starting instead of finishing. I would face whatever lay ahead as this new me, a woman who had learned at the age of 67 that it was never too late to start anew. Traveling through the center of Tuscany on roads that varied between contemporary highways and winding country lanes, the travel from Florence to Montepulciano took just under 2 hours. Luca turned out to be a great friend. He provided tidbits of local history and pointed us sights without being overbearing, but he also allowed for peaceful silences when the scenery called for it. The rolling hills in green and gold hues, interspersed with black cypress trees and the silvery gray of olive groves, became the Tuscany of paintings and postcards as we continued our drive into the countryside. Across hillsides, vineyards extended in geometric perfection, their tidy rows forming living patterns that mirrored the natural contours of the terrain. As we passed a particularly large vineyard, the wine that made Montepulciano famous, Luca stated, "We are entering Vino Nobile territory. For more over 3 centuries, our family has been cultivating grapes here." I was quite struck by the continuity and thought, that's remarkable. Has it been handed down from father to son forever? Luca grinned. Not all the time. Following my grandfather's death in the war, my grandma Sophia managed the vineyard for 20 years. At first, the villagers found it scandalous that a woman was making decisions about harvest and pruning, but she went on to produce some of our best vintages. I felt myself growing closer to him as I saw how proud he was of this female ancestor. She sounds strong. He laughed, terrifying, but wise, he said. She realized that while tradition is important, it must occasionally be compromised in order to endure. A medieval hill town with its stone buildings arranged like a crown atop a hilltop abruptly emerged ahead as the road started to ascend. Luca declared Montepulciano to be one of Tuscany's highest towns. While traveling to La Colombia, we will pass through. The town's Renaissance and medieval architecture was a marvel. Surrounded by old walls that once defended against Florentine and Sienese armies, narrow, winding alleyways suddenly emerge onto elegant piazzas, towering palazzi, and modest stone dwellings. You have to come back for a proper visit. As we made our way through the narrow streets, Luca said. The vistas from the main square, the cathedral, and the wine cellars carved out of the rock beneath the town are all worth seeing. Past Montepulciano. After descending into a breathtakingly beautiful valley, we turned onto a dirt road that went upward past vineyards and olive groves once more. 10 minutes or so later, we topped a ridge and saw La Columbia. My initial thought was that it blended in well with the surroundings. It was a working property that had developed naturally over generations, unlike the opulent villas I'd occasionally seen from the road. The property's name was likely derived from the square tower that stood next to the main house, a two-story stone building with green shutters and a terracotta roof. A central courtyard was encircled by a number of outbuildings, while vines extended along the southern slope. With sincerity, I said, "It's beautiful. It's so Tuscan." Lucas grinned, happy with my response. Not ostentatious, but genuine. My family's philosophy has always been to live simply yet well. Antonio came out of the main house with a big smile on his face as we pulled into the courtyard. Even though he was dressed casually, his tall, slender form nonetheless managed to look exquisite in light cotton pants and a short-sleeved shirt. He called, "Benvenuta alla Columbia," and came over as Luca assisted me getting out of the car. "Greetings from our house," I said, suddenly bashful. "Thank you for having me, even though we had met in Florence before." This felt more significant, more intimate, and different. "It's our pleasure," he said me, pointing at the mansion. "Sophia has made refreshments, so come on over. The trip must have worn you out." The house was as genuine on the inside as it was on the outside. Whitewashed walls, cool stone floors, and furniture that combined vintage items with cozy, well-worn pieces. Everything exuded quality and attention, but nothing seemed arrogant or meant to impress. Antonio took me to a loggia with a view of the valley, where a table was arranged with a platter of regional favorites, including thinly sliced prosciutto, a few cheeses, olives, and fresh bread, as well as a carafe of water and glasses of cold white wine. "Sit down, please," he said. "Consume some food. This place's air makes you hungry." A short, round woman with black hair tinged with silver strode onto the loggia as if at the exact moment. A warm smile wrinkled her face. Antonio said, "Ah, Sophia. Signora Palmer from America is our visitor." Sophia took both of my hands in hers and whispered, "Benvenuta," with warmth. "The garden cottage is ready for you. Very pleasant and secluded. Tell me if you need anything, anything at all." "Thank you." Touched by her sincere welcome, I answered. "Call me Judith, please." Sophia smiled, obviously enjoying this casualness. "Judith. Lovely name. Eat now. Consume. Opportunities come and go, and food gets cold." She hurried back inside after making that philosophic remark, and I couldn't help but smile at her vanishing figure. As Antonio poured water for us both, he stated that Sophia had been a part of our family since I was a boy. "She is La Colombia's real heart." I accepted a sip of the wine that Luca gave and remarked, "She seems wonderful. Everyone has been incredibly friendly." Such generosity overwhelms me a little. "Not kindness, but hospitality," Antonio kindly corrected. "There is a distinction. The purpose of kindness is to help those in need. Only privileged guests are entitled to hospitality." I was really moved by the distinction. How long had it been since I was regarded as someone whose presence was truly cherished, rather than as someone who needed to be accommodated or tolerated? Antonio and Luca engaged us in pleasant conversation throughout the afternoon as they related the history of the property, the pleasures and difficulties of winemaking, and the changes they had witnessed in the area over the years. The warmth of their companionship and the serene beauty of the surroundings caused the last of my travel-related stress to melt away, and I found myself fully unwinding. Sophia reappeared as the late afternoon light softened. "Before dinner, isn't it time to show Judith her cottage? She will want to relax and rejuvenate," Antonio said, of course, getting up from his seat. "I apologize, Judith, for taking up all of your time. Sophia is correct. You ought to have time to get comfortable." Surrounded by rose trellises and lavender shrubs, the garden cottage turned out to be a modest stone structure that was slightly detached from the main home. Antonio clarified that it had been converted into guest quarters with a separate entrance and a little private garden after serving as a groundskeeper's residence. The inside was small but well thought out, with a little writing desk and a sitting area with cozy chairs. A modern bathroom that somehow felt both up to date and in keeping with the cottage's historic history, and a bedroom with a wrought iron bed covered in clean white linens. I remarked, truly charmed with the quaint space. It's perfect. For one person, it's the perfect size. Antonio noted that Sophia had placed new towels in the bathroom and water near the bed. Dinner will be served at 8, but please don't rush. Relax, explore, and do whatever you want. Now this is your home. Your house. A profound yearning for belonging that I hadn't yet fully recognized was sparked by the simple phrase. I mutely thanked you for everything. Antonio gave me a loving look that acknowledged our common humanity without making any demands or expectations. I appreciate you coming. Late-life friendships are a unique treasure. I unpacked my few belongings after he departed and carefully put them in the old wooden wardrobe that took up one wall of the bedroom. The roomy area made my clothes appear pathetically sparse, serving as a visual reminder of how lightly I was transitioning through this unanticipated phase of my life. I took a big breath of the lavender and rose-scented air as I entered the tiny private garden. The view from this location was stunning, with vineyards catching the late afternoon light, undulating hills that stretched to far mountains, and a historic church tower visible on a distant crest. I took out my phone as I sat on a worn stone bench, intending to give Nathan a quick update. I was shocked to see that there was not even a bar of signal. Although Antonio had mentioned spotty cell coverage, I hadn't expected total disconnect. I experienced an unanticipated sense of lightness in place of tension, a relief from responsibility and the burden of other people's expectations and worries. I was really inaccessible for the first time since Portugal. Without my awareness or involvement, whatever was going on in Boston, in Nathan and Elisa's reality, or in my past life would go on. I could just be here, completely present in this stunning location, at this unexpected point in my journey, for the time being. As the sun started to set behind the far-off hills, the dinner bell rang, signaling me to return to the main house. I had a strong sensation of rightness as I strolled along the lavender-lined path, not that everything was settled or ideal, but that I was right where I needed to be at that very moment. It would all work itself out in due time, whether it was with Nathan, my life in Boston, or this surprising bond with Antonio. This tonight, for the time being. This dinner, this ongoing exploration of Judith Palmer's potential self when not bound by the expectations of others. The woman who had been deserted in Portugal was no more, changed by circumstance and bravery. Someone who had discovered that it was never too late to start over, that endings might lead to new beginnings, and that loss may lead to unexpected blessings. I walked into the next chapter of a novel that was still being written, my own, as well as dinner as I entered the warm light that spilled from the house. Please like and share my story if you enjoy it.